Okay, back at it. Another episode of the More To It podcast. I'm the host, Jay Moore with Hail Varsity Magazine, hailvarsity.com. Last week, didn't really have any podcasts to get into because we didn't have football. I did record a pregame pod with looking at Wisconsin. Obviously, that didn't get released because of no football. And with Wisconsin's rise in cases and they're kind of shutting things down, obviously not even having a game this week with Purdue. It'll be interesting to see how Wisconsin's season plays out. But we'll look at, Northwestern in this one, and obviously with a game, fingers still crossed as we're recording this on a Wednesday, that means Big Red wrap-up. So be sure to catch myself, Michael Zavere, on NET, Nebraska's PBS and NPR stations for game highlights and analysis on Big Red Wrap-Up Tuesday nights live at 7 on NET, World and Facebook, and at 10 on NET. So without having the two podcasts last week, I thought we just I had to bring out the big guns on this one and get my man Jason Peter. He joins me now. JP, how you doing, brother?
I'm good. How are you?
Hey, man. I'm well. It's Wednesday after, this is November 4th, so we're just kind of focusing on the election and all that craziness and talking about that and just politics. And obviously, we're going to stick to sports on this one, but
it's all chaos all the way around.
It's 2020
politics,
in a nutshell.
Yeah, politics, sports, Big Ten, you name it.
Yeah, it's not too. Big Ten's right up there with all the craziness. Yeah. So game gets canceled last week, and obviously I already hit it at with Wisconsin and them having to cancel a game with Purdue. I mean, their cases are up. I think they're at like 25 or 27 total cases among staff. And players are still not in a red situation. Asked Sam McEwen that last night on Big Red Wrap-Up because he's pretty on top of stuff. He says they're still not. I still think it'd be interesting to see if Paul Chris doesn't have it and two of their quarterbacks don't have it, if they're able to play. Because, let's be honest, Illinois played last week without 14 players and their starting quarterback as well.
Yeah.
So it's...
When they canceled the game, it was... there was 6 confirmed cases from players and 6 from
it was 12,
staff,
12
right?
total.
Yeah, and that's any given week where you just can't show up with 6 of your guys. I think if it's not that quarterback room, then we're playing the game. If it's 2 offensive linemen, a running back, a couple defensive linemen, I still think that we're playing that game. I don't agree with being able to do that. It's especially if you haven't surpassed, I guess, what the Big Ten laid out as. These are kind of the rules that we're going to live, this season by, and it seemed like they were still within those rules. But I guess the way that the Big Ten set it up, where it's kind of left up to the program,
right,
to whether or not they want to play the game. And to me, that's nuts. If you know football, I think you can watch Nebraska play Ohio State, and looking at it from Paul Chris in Wisconsin's point of view, you can turn on that film and know that, okay, the score was not as indicative as what actually happened out there on that field. And I got to believe that he thinks, if I go down there with, a converted wide receiver or my fifth-string quarterback, there's a good chance that we lose this game. Because Nebraska showed a lot of good things coming out of Ohio State. It's just, things started to snowball there at the end of the first half, and they just, weren't able to kind of fight their way back. But, I got to believe that if he's playing, I don't know, Purdue or somebody else, in that week, I think they play that game.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they're supposed to play Purdue this week, obviously canceled. Right. Last week I was frustrated, obviously totally biased, and I was on other radio shows, and I said Wisconsin should have to forfeit.
Yeah.
Because Nebraska's done everything right.
Yep.
And I got, some people disagreed with me and said, well, this is kind of, uncharted territories, and I get it. But they made the call. The Big Ten did not make the call. They made the call. Nebraska's done everything right. And all of a sudden, and it's people said it's maybe more on the lines of a hurricane or some catastrophe happens
Right.
with they can't travel. I'm like,
Well-
right, that affects the whole team, and you have to forfeit. That affects the whole team. That's not, and you might be able to reschedule that game anyways because you have more time. If you want to really get down to it, blame the Big Ten. They screwed the pooch on this from day one. But they had, you have 85 guys on scholarship now. Granted, some of those are red shirts, but you had more than capable play. The SEC standards are 53 scholarship players.
Yeah.
If you have 53, and obviously if they have a lot of, they're able to say if they have a bunch of guys out in one position, they can say, okay, we can't play. But it's just the vast differences amongst ACC, SEC, Big Ten is puzzling. It's just not surprising just what we're dealing with in the Big Ten, but.
Well, you could use COVID too for the excuse for anything nowadays. And
sure.
It's like when this whole thing happened, and you'd go and be on social media and kind of be hey, it's kind of a little fishy, I think, and everybody, well, there's 230,000 dead people, and it's just a game, and yeah, it is just a game, but you know what, these kids have also been working at this for their whole life, not just for the past 6 months, for their whole life, and there doesn't seem to be any sort of compensation package for these kids, because now, especially when you look at those kids that were booted from the game for the personal. You're looking at them blowing an entire year on ultimately like 6 games. That's if they play the rest. And I really believe that the rest of the season will depend on what Ohio State does. If Ohio State continues to win and is undefeated and they have a chance to play for a national championship, then I think all of the Big Ten season will continue. But if somehow or another Ohio State stumbles, I think the Big Ten wants to cancel the rest of the season.
I can see that. Yeah.
Yeah,
I can see
really
that.
do.
I could totally see that.
Yeah.
The way they set it up with the strict protocols, 8 games in 8 weeks. They didn't want to play. They obviously didn't want to play. They're the first one to pull the plug on it back in August, but they kind of succumbed to the pressure a little bit here, and rightfully so. They should have played football from the get-go. It should have been started in September to give them, because they knew it was going to happen. It's happened across the nation. Florida's had to postpone a game, Notre Dame's had to postpone a game, and you just reschedule it, and it works. And you had the whole ADs work for countless hours, like 120 hours of like Zoom calls or whatever it is on scheduling it, and then they have it all set up with multiple bye weeks to do this, and you cut the cord on it.
But how come nobody has? It seems like the bigger story for everybody covering college football or the Big Ten is Nebraska, and that we're always bitching and moaning about something.
I was going to get into this, but you're going.
Here you have this situation, all these people taking how about some of those national media do their job, because there are some stories coming out of Madison that maybe even the quarterback had tested positive prior to the game but wasn't showing any symptoms, so they let him play. Has anybody really looked into that? Have they looked into a big group of those guys going to that wedding?
Right.
Because if that's the case, and they're putting their team in jeopardy and ultimately their opponents at jeopardy, then without question that should be a forfeit.
If they're being reckless.
Right.
So Nebraska then tries to schedule a game with UTC. Everything's set up. UTC was only scheduled to play 1 game. They just played it, so they'd already went through testing protocols. They went through more stringent testing protocols. They had a test on Wednesday, the PC, whatever those full brain itching swab things they're doing, and they did it again on Thursday, and they had no cases. So obviously, even more stringent than the Big Ten. They shut it down. But I said this on Bigger Wrap Up last night. I go, this is so frustrating because Nebraska is trying to play football during football season, and you get the Pat Forties, you get Feinbaum, you get Dan Wolken, the Wetzel article, and they pile on Nebraska for just wanting to play football during football season. Yet they make them seem like the outcast, like they don't belong. But yet you have the crap that went on at Penn State.
Right.
You had the crap that has gone on at Michigan State. You've had
Ohio State's had shit going.
Yeah, and you have the thing is going on currently at Iowa.
Right.
I mean, there are players suing them right now. But yet Nebraska is the bad guy for wanting to play football. Yeah. I'm just like, what did we do? What did they do to you at one time? Like, I mean, you look at Pat. I mean, it's just comical. His article in talking about Frost being, giving the middle finger to the Big Ten because he didn't wear his mask during the game. I'm like, what are you?
It's because we're an easy target right now.
It's low hanging fruit.
Right.
It's low hanging
Absolutely.
fruit.
We haven't won, and I think people generally they look at Scott and they either kind of they love him or they despise kind of like the privileged quarterback who's now back running his home state school, and it's just I don't get it. I feel like there's so many other things out there that they could be focused on, but they also know that Nebraska fan, myself included, sometimes will bite on that stuff. Like we have so much pride in our school that God forbid anybody says one darn thing about it, we're ready to fight. And that's what makes Nebraska great, but it's also, I think a point where people like the 40s and all those guys you mentioned can take advantage of the Nebraska fan base.
Yeah, it's they know it's clicking.
Right.
It's clickbait. I mean, listen, I'm guilty. I mean, because it makes no sense to me. I mean, just absolutely piling on when obviously you can look into the Wisconsin situation and obviously you want to talk about Nebraska being the outcast of the Big Ten. It's like, come on, really?
Right.
Like, really? So it's that one is just it's still puzzling to me, and everything we're dealing with is still puzzling. How would I'm trying to take myself back. Could you imagine practicing all this time and only playing one flipping game?
So frustrated. Be so frustrated, so angry. Yeah, I mean it's remarkable. I think just to sit here and see how Nebraska actually has been able to keep those kids kind of in that quote unquote bubble. Because there's been a lot of buildup at certain point over the last couple of years. I mean, the last few months, going back to spring ball, as they're getting ready for spring ball, and then boom, that's pulled out from under them. And then, the same thing happens in training camp. And it's like these kids, I mean, I know they're student athletes, but let's not kid ourselves. They pick a school based upon football.
Right.
That's what they're coming here to do. They're football players, and to just have that kind of yanked out from underneath you, but yet they still continue to do the right thing. And I think that says a lot about Scott and his staff and the way that these kids also believe in what Scott is telling them. So I think it's that they've really shown the ability to fight through. I mean, especially just when you look at just the past few years. I mean, and the lack of success that we've had, but man, they keep grinding. You don't ever hear anybody coming out and talking bad about the staff. There have been some guys obviously that have left, but I just think that's part of college football now is guys, they show up on campus and within a couple months it's like it's me or it's not, and then they just put their name in the transfer portal.
And some of those guys you lose, I mean, that's addition by subtraction.
Right.
Right. I mean, you get some of that bad.
Right.
You get that cancer of guys talking, and it takes a couple guys, that you can start really affecting people. I mean, talk about when the game gets canceled as a college kid, and you're trying to do the necessary thing. Could the timing been any worse? Remember how good those Halloween parties were in college?
Oh yeah. And,
that's the best night of the year.
To play on Halloween. Yeah. It's too bad. Especially Wisconsin then too. I mean, my goodness. Whether you have fans in those stands or not. But yeah, that is heartbreaking for them. And I expressed that on social media one time. Like everybody was just like, oh, but put it in perspective. If people are dying, there's always people dying.
People die every
there
day.
is. I mean,
Right.
if we're gonna live our lives like that for the next 5-10 years, I mean, it's gonna be a pretty rough 5-10 years. I mean, these kids, you're talking about an age group where even if they catch it, half of them don't even know that they've got
Right.
it. These kids are in top shape. They're some of the best athletes in the world. And, when there's not a physical reaction to them really getting this virus, but it goes fast, man. It goes fast. You know how fast it goes. I know how fast it goes. Those 4 years are up before you know it. And this is going to count for one of those years for those guys. So the fact that it's already been reduced, from eliminating the non-conference games to just the conference games, and now you're eliminating one of those games. I mean, you've got some guys that have like 6-game seasons.
Right. I know it's. That's. I mean, so you look now forward to. Let's look forward to Northwestern, and they get the schedule, and Nebraska's now only going to have fingers crossed, 7 games. You have to play a total of 6 to be eligible to play in the Big Ten Conference Championship if you win enough games. Wisconsin's, they can't cancel any more games, otherwise they're out. Looking at that schedule.
But shouldn't they have to, right? If you go by the rules of this 21-day thing, right?
Right.
Technically, like if you're not healthy enough to play against us last week, and then you're not healthy enough to play this week, you should have to cancel another one then.
And it
right?
easily could be.
Yeah.
And then if you do that, all of a sudden, like what would happen? Like it's really interesting. Like, and that's why Barry Alvarez has been very vocal on trying to change this whole 21-day rule, because they're finally realizing this myocarditis thing is not an issue.
Right.
They're not an issue. It's the ACC is their 10 days, and you have to pass like some cardio test like within a couple days, and you're able to play. That's why Trevor Lawrence can't play this weekend against Notre Dame, because his 10 days is Saturday, but he has to still go through a couple cardio respiratory testing. But it's still not 21 freaking days.
Right.
So it's interesting. I think it'll be very interesting to see if there's some changes, because if not, like Wisconsin probably can't play next week against Michigan.
Right. Yeah.
And then you could see an addendum potentially, but again, who knows? But looking forward,
and they need to change it, because what? It could be in Columbus next week.
Right.
Right. And that's the last school that they want, to have some sort of issue with COVID, because if that rule is still in place, now you're talking about your kind of your sole national championship contender. It will be interesting to see what they do with that.
Yeah. So looking, the schedules. After you've seen what Nebraska's done, winning the one game and playing against one of the best teams in the nation, and seeing Penn State, and seeing the rest of these teams. Iowa doesn't look great. Minnesota doesn't look great. Illinois is not good. Purdue is better than what probably people expected, even though they've played. I know they played Iowa the first game. I'm blanking on who they played last weekend. But it's like, even Penn State, like, these games are winnable if things are. Nebraska can finish out, 6-1 potentially, or even go 5-2 and lose to Penn State, and then win all your West Conference games.
Right.
And
they
could. I don't want to put the cart before the horse here, but like, it's looking a lot better than what I thought heading into the season.
The Nebraska team that played the first half against Ohio State, in my opinion, beats the Penn State team that played Ohio State, in that first half. I think Penn State, they've got a few really good playmakers at the receiver and tight end position. I think the quarterback is kind of a gamer. But I think, our lines, the way that our offensive line, you're talking about one of the best teams in the country in Ohio State. I thought our offensive line was pushing their front seven all over the place in that first half. They really did a good job. But you can't have, again, and this was an issue, for the past few years, those dumb penalties. You can't come out of a break and get a delayed game. I mean, you cannot do that. And I just don't know if, is that not being relayed? Are those kids not grasping that? Was it something on the sidelines with getting, into to the huddle late? I don't know, but there are things obviously that Nebraska needs to work on. As well as I do. Usually the most gains are made from the first to the second game, which is another good sign because I didn't think that we looked horrible. I thought actually in that first half, in the way that they responded, to Ohio State scoring, and boom, we go right back down and score. But you got it. All offensive guys that handle the ball got to understand that the most important thing that you'll ever, one of the biggest rules or the most important rule is you take care of the football. You cannot turn the ball over. And, it kind of falls into this whole Adrian or McCaffrey sort of thing. And, I'm not ready to give up on Adrian. No. I think he's still a good quarterback. I think we've got to do things to regain some of his confidence that he had in that first year. I think last year kind of maybe set him back, and that can happen playing with injury and stuff like that. But it's always the backup is the most likable guy on the team. But I think you saw it's different when you're a guy that comes in just to rush the passer on third down, or you come in for 2 plays here and then you're out for
specialty.
It's a big difference when you got to run every single play out there and you're a starter. So McCaffrey, he's young, he's a playmaker, but it's way too early in my opinion. Now that doesn't mean that you can't give him a series or 2 or 3. And Adrian's been great about it. I think that's a leader. That's why Adrian is a captain. He's not scared of McCaffrey. He's actually trying to help him. He knows that it's all about the big picture. The culture being created and all that. And watching and listening to Adrian speak during the week is it's
maturity.
Positive thing.
Yeah, it's a lot of maturity. My biggest, people ask me, Northwestern's got 2 games under the belt. Nebraska has 1. Some people say, well, Nebraska coming fresher. I said, I think it's a little bit negative Nebraska did not get a chance to play because one thing is, you said it, you've already touched on it, you make your biggest jump from game 1 to game 2. Right. And you kind of get to know, you can work out those kinks. But also is Nebraska needs confidence in winning football games. Yeah. And Northwestern's already won 2 at Iowa last week, and they're down 17-0. So they got a little confidence going where Nebraska still doesn't know how to win football games yet. And I think not playing that game against Wisconsin was more detrimental than some people might think.
Sure, absolutely. And also, just the timing of things, offensively or defensively. I mean, how timing goes when you're running inline games up front. Linebackers coming on blitzes, that's stuff that is just, it's kind of perfected by repetition. And the same on offense, getting used to your quarterback's hard count, all these little things that go in that people don't really think about, when you're sitting there watching the game or thinking about the preparation, that goes in throughout the week. But yeah, these are all things that you're constantly working on and that you really only get perfected by doing them when it's for real.
When it matters,
not when the coach can say, blow the whistle and say, do it over again. Right. Now there's consequences to everything that you do, and that usually only you either become really good at it or bad by it just by doing it over the course of a game.
Yeah. So what you look at what Northwestern, what they're doing with Fitzgerald, what always amazes you, because they don't get the talent, but it just seems like year in and year. I mean, last year they were terrible offensively. Now they have Peyton Ramsey, the transfer from Indiana, who's can run it a little bit, a good thrower. But what always just amazes you with Northwestern, because they're kind of similar to Wisconsin in the fact that you know what you get, and it's just like, golly, we've always been played close games with them, but
just well coached.
Yeah.
I mean, just well coached. They're not going to shoot themselves in the foot. They want to keep it to a slugfest. They want it to be one kind of in between the tackles, and Fitzgerald is just a master at squeezing every last ounce of juice out of that fruit. They just never really fall too far. Maybe the ceiling is obviously a lot lower for them, but I mean, you look at some of the guys the Patty Fishers and stuff like that. I mean, these are guys that could start on any Big Ten team in the country. I mean, these are just football players, and that's what I think that's what he finds, and that's kind of similar, I think, with Wisconsin, and it's kind of the way that Nebraska kind of used to be. And you certainly have your high, your 4 and 5 star guys sprinkled in, but the core of the team is just blue collar, hardworking, tough kids. Probably got a chip on their shoulder from being slighted somewhere. And they play hard for him and for the rest of that staff.
Yeah, you can't be. They're not dummies.
Right.
You can't be a dumbass.
They're not going to beat themselves.
Right. Well, you
9 out of 10 times.
You can't be a dumbass and go to Northwestern.
Right.
You gotta have some book smarts. That usually helps towards the football field. How do you think this game? I already did my score projection yesterday on Big Red Wrap Up. I said Nebraska wins this thing 24-20. Play well at Ryan Field. I think the line, I haven't checked here lately. Last time I saw it was, I think, Northwestern anywhere from -3 to -4. Over-unders are 50-some in there, around 52, 53.
I would think that if Nebraska can find, that deep threat they're talking about last week when we were getting ready for Wisconsin, that Omar Manning or, somebody.
Monte Brown.
Was gonna be more involved in the game plan. I think that was very handcuffed, our offense a lot in that first game. You've got to be able, especially when you're playing a team like Ohio State. I mean, you cannot tell those guys, 11 guys that are most likely going to play on Sundays, a lot of them being, first and second rounders, that don't worry about defending, the 60 yards behind you. We're just going to worry about, these 20, 25 yards here. That is hard then, man, on that offense. That's why it's always so tough to score down in the red zone, because you got that shrunken field.
Right.
Well, when they were playing Nebraska that first game, it was a shrunken field pretty much for the entire 60 minutes. And that's, I think, why Scott had such high hopes. And not saying that they aren't still excited about Omar Manning, but you've got to get somebody on that field that can stretch that defense out. And I think if an Omar Manning or somebody does show up and play well, then I think Nebraska can score 35, 40 points. On the flip side of it, I think for as tough and into the game as defense looked against Ohio State, they still need to find a pass rusher. They need to be able to get some pressure coming off the edge, and they just lack that. And they have in the Ohio State game. Granted, you're going against one of the better offensive lines, but you got to be able to get pressure.
You got to go. They didn't go. They pushed the pocket. They squeezed it. They get. Again,
and the cushions.
Right.
I was surprised at the cushions that
I get it.
secondary.
Yeah. I mean, you got to. To me, that game was a track meet. Nebraska wins that game or has a chance. It has to be high scoring, 42-38, 42-45, where it's listen, you got to limit them, get them in the red zone. That field shrinks. You can maybe hold them to 3 points.
Yeah.
But Nebraska's offense just didn't hold up the deal. I mean, they got to give up a touchdown on a turnover. So going into this, I always have my 4 questions: two offensive, 2 defensive. Then we'll see what happens in the post game. So 2 offensive questions here is: so Northwestern has 7 turnovers through 2 games against Maryland and Iowa. Can Nebraska win the turnover battle? Not break even, win it. So that's a big key for me to win this football game offensively. Other one is Northwestern's defense is only allowing 70 yards rushing through 2 games. Can Dedrick Mills get going in this one? I think you're going to see him get the ball more than 6 times.
Yeah.
And I think you're going
to have to.
You're going to probably see more of a normal offensive game plan. I think
Right.
the Ohio State one's a little experimental, a little screwy a little bit, just to try to get some things going. But those are kind of my two keys to look at offensively going into this one.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. There needs to be a more consistent effort at trying to get that run game going. It just seemed, and it was surprising because I thought the offensive line did a good job in that first half of moving bodies around. But it just seemed like they would much rather have those quick outs that are substituted, lots of times for run plays than actually running, the ball. And but yeah, so I'm with you on the running part. The turnover issue, it may be a blessing in disguise, with the times that the ball was put on the turf against Ohio State, because now it's something I'm sure that Scott and his staff, they came back, on that Monday, and that became a priority of, guys not only trying to strip it, but, those offensive skill guys being constantly having guys trying to get it out during the week. And so sometimes, you gotta take a step back in order to go forward, and hopefully that's the situation with the turnovers. But it's, it's the turnover battle is usually a good indicator at how the game is going to turn out.
Yeah, and then so my two questions defensively is, can the defense hold up in the first half without Deontay Williams and Cam Taylor-Britt? That's one. And the second one is, can Nebraska then get off the field on third down? Because they struggle. They were 8 of 13 against Ohio State. So can they get that at least under 50%? So those are my two main keys. They kind of coincide with each other, hand in hand. But those are my two main keys, two questions heading into this one defensively.
Yeah, it's tough. I'm not sure exactly who's going to replace those guys.
Yeah, Newsome. So he played a lot last year because Deontay Williams is out, and I'm not for sure. I know, I want to say it's Clark Braxton, but he might be, I can't remember if he was hurt or not. Because I can't remember who they said. I'm drawing a blank right now.
But besides, losing those guys in the pass game, they're also good run support guys.
Yeah, they're physical players too.
Physical players, right. And so that's tough to replace, but it puts more of a burden on that front seven, and sometimes, like the turnover thing, when more is expected out of you, sometimes it's something good that pushes you and forces you to do better. I think it helps that Northwestern isn't this offensive, powerhouse, right?
They're a fraction of what Ohio State is.
So, in that regard, I think, they caught a break there. I expect Shenander to keep these guys going and continue to get better. Hopefully the defensive line continues to, want more responsibility put on their shoulders. All starts with shutting the run down, though, because you have to make a team as close to one-dimensional as you can. And I like some of the guys that they have up there. I was hoping to see more of the Keem Green and the kid from Carolina.
Yep.
I don't know if it's a matter of them not knowing the entire playbook or what, but they were still only in there, a handful of times, and just by the eye test, Keem Green is somebody that you hope is on the field all the time.
He's a big boy.
He's a big guy. He had
a way Ty Robinson looked, though.
Yeah,
pretty good.
Yeah.
That's that was again.
They
he played sparingly last year he played well against Wisconsin, but as a true freshman, holding up his own against some goal line situation with Wisconsin. So I like the way he did. JP, I appreciate it, man.
Anytime.
Thank you. That was good. We'll be back on Sunday. I'll get my post game pod. And be sure to join me and Mike Severe on NET, Nebraska's PBS and NPR stations for game highlights and analysis on Big Red Wrap-Up Tuesday nights, live at 7 on NET World and Facebook, and at 10 on NET. We'll be back hopefully discussing a Nebraska win early next week.
A Hurrdat Media Production.